Captain Simone Williams stepped onto the tarmac just after dawn, her polished pilot's wings reflecting the soft light of the rising sun. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her uniform crisp and neat. Every button on her jacket was fastened, her trousers sharply creased. Around her waist hung a compact tool pouch filled with items she sometimes used to check instruments in small aircraft. She smiled at the ground crew members milling about, greeting each by name with a nod or a quick friendly good morning. To her, every person here was part of a team working toward the same goal, keeping the skies safe and schedules on time. The airport hangar bustled with activity. Mechanics in coveralls crouched beside engines, inspecting every bolt and hose. Baggage handlers rolled carts of luggage down service roads. Line technicians guided vehicles into proper parking positions. The noise of engines idling in the distance mixed with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. It was a place that thrived on routine, where everyone knew their role and followed it to the letter. Simone paused at the edge of the runway, taking in the scene. Her Gulfstream jet stood gleaming in the morning light, its sleek white body waiting patiently for its next flight. She admired its smooth lines, a testament to human ingenuity and design. She loved the feeling of control she experienced when she sat in its cockpit, the way the world seemed to shrink beneath her as she soared above clouds and continents. Flying was more than a job for her. It was a calling, a passion that filled her heart with joy each time she fastened her seatbelt and prepared for takeoff. Carrying her leather flight bag, she walked toward the maintenance area, where the new ground attendant was busy labeling equipment. This young man was eager, but inexperienced, still learning the ropes. He glanced up as Simone approached, his eyes following the tool pouch at her waist and the casual way she moved among the larger, lower-slung vehicles. In his quick judgment, he assumed she must be here to clean or fix something on the tarmac, rather than to pilot the aircraft. He cleared his throat and pointed toward the long row of storage sheds. "Over there is where we keep the cleaning supplies," he said, voice polite but firm. "If you could help sweep up before we start the day, that'd be great." Simone stopped, surprised. She kept her expression calm, remembering that first impressions mattered just as much for her as they did for others. She took a deep breath, gently setting down her bag. "Thank you," she said in a clear, steady voice. "But I'm actually here as the captain for the CEO's flight today. I'll need to head over to the Gulfstream for the pre-flight checks." She lifted her chin politely, meeting his gaze without challenge. The attendant blinked, shifting from polite firmness to confusion in an instant. He scratched his head, looking at her name badge, and then down at her coveralls. For a moment, the two stood in silence, neither quite believing what they saw. He opened his mouth to respond, but then closed it, as if searching for the right words. Simone waited patiently, her posture relaxed but authoritative. Every moment felt amplified, the surrounding noise fading to a low hum as the attendant struggled to reconcile what he thought he knew with reality. Behind him, another crew member, a woman in a bright safety vest, walked into the scene. Her eyes flicked from Simone's face to her uniform details. She paused, recognition dawning. "Captain Williams?" she asked hesitantly, as if testing the idea aloud. Simone nodded, a polite smile spreading across her face. The attendant's shoulders sank with relief as he realized his mistake. The woman quickly stepped forward, offering a sincere apology. "I'm so sorry for the confusion," she said. "I should have known. Please come this way." Simone accepted the apology, gracefully brushing off the awkwardness. She picked up her flight bag and walked toward the jet. As she passed, other ground crew members straightened their posture and saluted her with more respect than before. The attendant who had mistaken her looked away, cheeks slightly flushed. Simone did not scold him. She understood how easy it was to make assumptions. In fact, she had faced many such moments throughout her career. Each time, she reminded herself that patience and professionalism could help change perceptions one encounter at a time. Outside the hangar doors, the morning air held a gentle coolness. Simone paused again to look up at the sky above the runway. A thin veil of clouds stretched across the horizon like wisps of cotton candy. The scent of jet fuel and fresh pavement filled her lungs. She savored these few seconds of peace before the flurry of tasks that awaited her once she entered the cockpit. She loved how this place combined precision and freedom, structure and adventure. She climbed the steps onto the Gulfstream's wing, careful with each step so as not to scuff the paint. The cockpit door opened smoothly, revealing an array of instruments, screens, and controls. The sight never failed to thrill her. She sat down in the pilot seat, adjusted her headset, and ran her fingers over the throttle. Each switch and dial had its own purpose, its own story. She ran through her mental checklist: verify fuel levels, inspect oil temperature, confirm flight plan, test communications. These routines provided a sense of calm, a reassurance that everything was under control. Inside the cabin, the CEO's assistant had already arranged refreshments, bottled water, light snacks, and a fresh newspaper folded neatly on the side table. The polished leather seats gleamed under the cabin lights. Simone peeked down the aisle, making sure the cabin was clean and orderly. She appreciated these small touches, knowing they contributed to a comfortable and professional environment for her passenger. Back outside, the ground crew fell into coordinated motion. A tug hooked onto the nose wheel, ready to guide the aircraft. Back to the runway. Fuel trucks positioned themselves at the wing, lines extending to the fuel ports. Simone touched the comm button. "Ground, this is Gulfstream 323. Ready for pushback and engine start." Her voice was calm and clear, the wow tone of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Within seconds, the response came through. "Roger that, Gulfstream 323. Pushback approved. Engines can start after clearance." Then, "Stand by," followed by a fresh wave of activity below her feet. Simone glanced out the cockpit window, at the crew working efficiently. She felt pride in being part of this well-oiled machine, but she also carried the memory of the moment just before, when assumptions almost stood in the way of her work. It reminded her how vital it was to stay true to herself, to let her skills speak louder than preconceived ideas. She understood that every small action today could shape someone's view of what a pilot looked like, or who belonged in this cockpit. As the tug pulled the Gulfstream backward, Simone completed her startup procedure. The engines roared to life, a deep, powerful hum that resonated through the fuselage. Vibrations ran through her fingertips as she held the controls steady. Lights blinked on the instrument panel, confirming systems coming online. She checked each gauge, all green. With everything in order, she confirmed with ground control. "Gulfstream 323 is ready to taxi." The attendant, who had mistaken her, now offered a respectful salute as the jet began its journey down the tarmac. Simone returned the gesture with a nod. In that brief exchange, something shifted. Perhaps today he would think twice before judging someone by their coveralls. Maybe someone else watching would feel inspired to follow her example of calm professionalism. Simone guided the jet toward the runway, her eyes focused, her mind already planning the flight ahead. She thought about the CEO's agenda, meetings, in another city, important decisions on today's schedule, and felt honored to play a part in making his day run smoothly. Above all, she felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came just before takeoff. Soon she would lift into the sky and leave all assumptions behind, soaring into clear blue. For now, she would finish her checks, taxi onto the runway, and prepare for the moment when power and airspeed met, and the world would open wide beneath her wings. Simone guided the Gulfstream smoothly into the sky, feeling the familiar surge of power as the engines pushed the aircraft upward. Below her, the runway shrank quickly, replaced by fields and city blocks that looked like tiny models laid out on a board. She kept her hands steady on the yoke, eyes scanning the instrument panel to confirm climb rate, airspeed, and altitude. The early morning light streamed through the cockpit windows, painting the interior in soft shades of gold and blue. Now and then, small puffs of cloud drifted past like cotton balls floating in a calm pond. Once the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Simone switched on the autopilot. The device would hold the aircraft steady on its programmed route, allowing her to focus on monitoring the systems and communicating with air traffic control. She glanced to her right and saw the CEO's assistant giving her a polite nod through the glass partition. The cabin behind her held a quiet hum, the sound of air conditioning, the faint click of latches, and the soft rustle of the newspaper the assistant had picked up. Simone reached over to turn on the cabin intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking," she said in a warm, friendly tone. "We have reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet and expect smooth air for the next hour. The flight time today will be approximately 2 hours, weather permitting. Please feel free to sit back and enjoy the journey." She clicked off the intercom and smiled, knowing that clear information helped passengers relax. A few minutes later, the CEO himself appeared at the cockpit door. He was a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a thoughtful expression. He wore a dark suit and his tie was neatly knotted. He greeted Simone with a handshake. "Captain Williams, thank you for the prompt departure. I apologize again for the confusion on the ground earlier." His tone was genuine and Simone appreciated his sincerity. "Not at all, sir," she replied, returning the handshake with confidence. "I'm happy we could get away on time." She gestured at the instruments. "Everything is looking excellent so far. We're on course and ahead of schedule by a few minutes." He peered at the screens, nodding. "I always enjoy flying on your flights. You make it look so easy." Simone felt a warmth in her chest at his compliment. She had worked hard for every hour in the cockpit, every qualification, every check ride. To have the executive of her company recognize her skill meant a great deal. As he turned to leave, he paused. "By the way, I have an idea for our next charter flight," he said, lowering his voice. "I'd like your opinion." Simone's curiosity was piqued. "Of course," she replied. "What did you have in mind?" He motioned for her to join him at the cabin table. Simone disengaged the autopilot momentarily, watching the plane hold its course automatically, and climbed down the few steps. The cabin was quiet and comfortable, lined with cream-colored leather seats. A polished wood table sat in the center, and on it lay charts and a tablet displaying potential destinations. The CEO spread out a map of the Caribbean. "I'm considering a short trip to St. Bart's for the summer retreat," he explained. "It's a bit off our usual path, but I think the crew would appreciate the change of scenery." He tapped the map. "What do you think about the approach into Gustav III Airport? I've heard the runway can be tricky, with hills on either side and water at the end." Simone studied the chart. "You're right. It's one of the more challenging approaches in the region, but entirely manageable with proper planning," she said. "The runway is short, only about 2,700 feet long, and the terrain means we need to be precise on our descent profile. We'd use a steeper approach angle and ensure flaps are set correctly for landing. I'd also brief the crew on potential crosswinds, which can pick up in the afternoons." She tapped her finger on a spot just before the runway. "If we schedule the flight for the morning, winds are usually calmer, and we can plan for a slightly higher landing speed to maintain control, then apply maximum reverse thrust once on the ground." The CEO listened attentively, nodding. "Excellent. Let's plan for mid-morning departure then. I trust your judgment entirely." He leaned back in his seat. "I'd also like to know if you have any concerns about safety or crew rest. I don't want anyone pushing too hard." Simone appreciated his thoughtfulness. "I'll ensure we plan crew rest according to regulation," she said. "We'll arrive with plenty of time to spare before your meetings. Safety is always the top priority." They spent the next few minutes finalizing times and crew assignments. All the while, Simone enjoyed the exchange. It reminded her that her role went beyond flying the plane. She was an advisor and a leader, someone whose expertise shaped decisions at the highest level. After the CEO returned to his seat, Simone climbed back to the cockpit. She re-engaged the autopilot and prepared to resume monitoring the flight. Nearby, the assistant was setting out light refreshments on the cabin table: fresh fruit, croissants, and sparkling water. Simone offered a friendly nod as she passed by. She settled back into her seat and checked the navigation display again. The path to their destination was clear, with no significant weather systems ahead. She toggled the radio frequencies, receiving updates from controllers along the way. Each communication was a steady flow of information: positions of other aircraft, altitude clearances, and slight adjustments to headings. Simone responded crisply, her voice measured and calm. Part of her mind stayed on the earlier incident with the attendant. She thought about how small moments could reveal larger issues of bias and assumption. But in the cabin, she also felt the power of respect and collaboration. The CEO had acknowledged her Nung Li and sought her advice. That recognition balanced out the mistake on the ground and reinforced her belief in gradual progress. As the hours passed, the sun climbed higher, turning the sky bright blue. Outside the windows, ocean waves shimmered like diamonds far below. Islands dotted the water, each one a mosaic of green hills and white beaches. Simone confirmed that their projected time over the destination matched the plan. She made a few entries in her flight log, recording fuel burn, weather conditions, and her personal remarks on system performance. Soon, air traffic control called with the descent clearance. Simone reduced power and adjusted the autopilot settings for descent. The plane began a gentle downward slope. She felt the change in pressure, the slight shift in the cabin air. Instruments showed falling altitude and increasing airspeed. She monitored the vertical speed indicator, aiming for the rate she had calculated earlier. "Cabin crew, prepare for descent," Simone announced. In the cabin, she heard chairs click as the assistant secured items on the table. The CEO tucked away his tablet and buckled his seatbelt. Everyone moved with quiet efficiency, ready for the next phase of the journey. Simone double-checked the approach chart for the Caribbean airport. She verified the waypoints, noting the minimum safe altitudes at each segment. There were hills rising on the left side of the runway and water ahead. The margin for error was small, but she felt confident. She had landed in places like this before, always respecting the demands of the terrain. As she neared the first waypoint, she disengaged autopilot for a manual fly-by-wire segment, giving her direct feel of the controls. The yoke responded to her touch, the aircraft obedient and precise. She eased the throttle back, letting the plane descend at the planned angle. Through the windshield, she saw the runway appear below, framed by steep slopes and clear water. She lined up the center line, flaring the nose just at the right moment. The wheels touched down smoothly, and she applied reverse thrust gently at first, then more firmly as the speed bled away. The tires hissed on the runway, and the jet slowed to taxi speed. Simone steered the plane toward the designated parking spot. Ground crew waved and guided her in with hand signals. Once stopped, she set the parking brake and shut down the engines. The cabin lights dimmed, and the hum faded into silence. She unfastened her harness and opened the cockpit door. "In IB." The CEO rose and extended his hand. "That was an excellent landing, Captain," he said with a smile. "Thank you for another flawless flight." Simone shook his hand, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. The moment brought everything full circle, from the early misunderstanding on the tarmac to the respect she had earned in the air. She knew that each flight carried its own challenges, but she was ready for them all, head held high, wings at her command. Simone stepped off the Gulf Stream onto the warm tarmac, the late morning sun coating the runway in soft light. She walked with steady grace toward the service vehicle waiting to take her and the CEO back to the resort hangar. A small bead of sweat formed at her hairline, reminders of the humidity in this tropical air. Still, she felt a sense of pride. She had navigated a tricky landing and kept the flight on time. Everything had gone smoothly in the sky. Inside the vehicle, the CEO reclined in his seat, scrolling through his schedule on a tablet. He looked up as Simone climbed in beside him. His expression was relaxed, but his eyes held a thoughtful spark. "Simone," he began, "I want to thank you again for that approach. Many pilots shy away from St. Bart's. You handled it like a pro." She smiled, settling into the seat. "Thank you, sir. It was challenging, but preparation made the difference." She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I always review every detail, no matter how small." The vehicle rattled over service roads as it carried them past fuel trucks and maintenance bays. Simone noticed how the ground crew paused to watch her pass, some offering nods or quick waves. She returned their greetings. Even here, far from home, she felt the weight of their recognition, and the memory of that first morning's mistake flickered again in her mind. At the hangar beside the resort, a small gathering waited. the CEO's executive assistant, a few members of the safety team, and the local operations manager. They stood under the shade of a canopy, folding chairs lined up for a quick debrief. Simone stepped out and smoothed her uniform, careful not to crease it. The assistant approached, clipboard in hand, and offered her water. Simone accepted gratefully, her hand still carrying the thrill of flight. They moved to the chairs. The operations manager, a tall man with a neatly trimmed mustache, cleared his throat. "Captain Williams," he said, voice cordial. "We've been reviewing the log and speaking with the crew. Everything went well. However, we did have a slight mix-up with ground handling this morning. I want to understand more about what happened." Simone nodded slowly, setting her water on the small table beside her. "When I arrived, a new attendant thought I was on janitorial duty. I showed my credentials and explained my role. A supervisor corrected him and we moved on." She paused. It was awkward, but the mistake was cleared quickly. The operations manager frowned slightly. "It should never have happened. We pride ourselves on professional conduct. I apologize on behalf of the team." His apology was sincere, but Simone saw that deeper questions lingered. How had someone jumped to that conclusion so fast? What biases lay beneath the surface? She took a breath and chose her words carefully. "I know everyone has a job to do. I also know that assumptions can get in the way of good teamwork. I appreciate the swift correction. Moving forward, perhaps, we can include a brief reminder in morning safety talks. A note that all personnel should verify identities before making assumptions." The operations manager nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's a good idea. We'll implement it immediately." He jotted something on his notepad. The assistant peeked over his shoulder and gave Simone a grateful smile. The CEO joined the conversation. "Simone, you did more than fly the plane today. You taught us all a lesson in respect. Thank you for handling that with grace." He leaned forward. "I'd like to fund a short briefing for new crew members, something about awareness and inclusion. I'll speak with HR when we return." Simone felt a warmth spread through her chest. It was one thing to win respect in the cockpit. It was another to see that respect spark real change. She offered a polite smile. "I'd be honored to help develop that." They wrapped up the meeting after a few more logistical notes. Refueling, schedules, passenger transport plans, and the CEO's next appointments. Simone made sure everyone had clear action items. The assistant gathered the charts and tablet, and the operations manager gave a final nod of approval before dismissing the group. Later, as Simone walked back toward the Gulf Stream to finish her post-flight checklist, she passed a small gathering of local pilots. They had heard about her landing and wanted to meet her. She stopped and greeted them warmly. A young pilot stepped forward, eyes shining. "Captain Williams, I saw how you handled that approach. I've only flown smaller aircraft. One day I hope to fly jets like that." Simone crouched to be at his eye level, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "You will," she said simply. "Keep learning, keep practicing. Trust in your training and stay calm under pressure. You'll get there." The group thanked her, and Simone felt a renewed sense of purpose. It wasn't just about flying a jet. It was about opening doors for others. In the cabin of the Gulfstream, she completed the checklist, securing loose items, shutting down electronics, and logging the flight details. She noted fuel usage, weather conditions, and personal observations on handling the approach. These records were more than data. They were lessons for the future. As she finished, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from a colleague back home. The company's internal newsletter was featuring her story, her skill on the runway, and the earlier incident on the tarmac. Screenshots of email threads showed support from fellow pilots, mechanics, and executives. Some messages praised her patience and professionalism. Others celebrated her role as a trailblazer for pilots of color. Simone leaned against the jet's fuselage, reading the messages on the small screen. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt air and sun-warmed concrete. She thought of the many moments that had led her here. Every long study session, every simulator session, every early morning briefing. She remembered the first time she had flown solo and the rush it brought. That evening, after the CEO's meeting and media interviews were complete, Simone found herself alone in the quiet hangar. The jet's engines were cold, and the lights inside were dimmed. She walked around the aircraft, speaking softly to herself. "This is why I fly," she said, "to show what's possible, to push past limits, to inspire." A faint reflection of her uniform and tool pouch appeared on the polished surface. In that reflection, she saw not just a pilot but a symbol of resilience and change. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the humidity and the calm. Then she turned toward the terminal building, where the lights glowed like beacons against the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, pre-flight planning for the next journey, meetings about crew training, perhaps an invitation to speak at a pilot academy. Simone walked toward the exit, her steps sure and purposeful. Behind her, the Gulf Stream stood ready for its next adventure. Ahead, opportunities and challenges awaited. She carried the memory of both warm praise and that first cold assumption in her mind. It reminded her that progress often came in small steps, one conversation, one briefing, one flight at a time. Under the night sky of the Caribbean, Captain Simone Williams felt a quiet determination. She would keep flying, keep teaching, and keep breaking barriers, no matter where the wind carried her. Simone rose early the next morning, the warm glow of sunrise filtering through her hotel room window. She packed her flight bag with care, double-checking charts, manuals, and personal notes. Today's return trip would take her and the CEO back to their home base, followed by a brief stop at the company's headquarters for a pilot training workshop Simone had been invited to lead. She dressed in her uniform, each crease and button reflecting her attention to detail, and headed downstairs to the waiting vehicle. On the drive to the airport, she reviewed her notes on the workshop. The session would cover best practices for cockpit resource management, strategies to avoid distractions, and the importance of clear communication, especially when routine slips into routine. Simone intended to weave in her own experiences, from that moment of mistaken identity on the tarmac to the tricky approach into St. Bart's. She believed that real stories, told honestly, could make lessons stick in a way that dry bullet points never would. At the hangar, the Gulf Stream gleamed under bright floodlights. Ground crew moved with purpose, refueling the jet, restocking snacks, and performing routine checks. Simone climbed the steps onto the wing, pausing briefly to admire the smooth fuselage. She thought of every flight she had logged and every challenge she had overcome. She pressed her hand lightly to the metal, as if greeting an old friend. Inside, the cockpit, she ran through her startup checklist. Instruments flickered to life, panels illuminated, and the hum of auxiliary power filled the cabin. She called ground control for pushback clearance, receiving a crisp, "Cleared to push and start, Gulfstream 323. The tug backed the jet away from its parking spot, and the engines roared in sequence, each one a testament to the craft of engineering and the skill of pilots who learned to tame that power. Once airborne, Simone leveled at cruising altitude and switched on the cabin intercom. "Good morning, everyone. We're on our way back to headquarters and expect a smooth flight of about 2 hours. Thank you for flying with us." She smiled, as the assistant acknowledged her message with a friendly nod. The sky outside was clear, a brilliant blue canvas stretching to the horizon. As the autopilot held course, Simone pulled out her workshop materials. On the tablet screen, she had organized examples, discussion questions, and reflection prompts. She reviewed how she would begin, a brief recounting of earlier events, asking participants to imagine being in her shoes. She believed that empathy was the key to changing mindsets and building stronger crews. When they touched down at the main base, ground crew greeted Simone and the CEO with respectful nods. Inside the terminal, a small group of fellow pilots, instructors, and safety officers waited for her. Some wore fresh uniforms, their smiles tinged with curiosity about the workshop. Simone took a deep breath, straightened her jacket, and entered the briefing room. She opened with a warm greeting. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice steady. Today, I want to talk about two things: how we manage our own biases and how we manage our resources in the cockpit. She outlined the agenda. First, a short storytelling session. Second, interactive exercises on communication. And third, a group discussion on policy improvements. For the storytelling segment, Simone recounted the mistaken identity incident. She described her calm approach when the attendant directed her to the maintenance shed, how she showed her credentials, and how she felt when colleagues stepped in to correct the error. She paused, letting her audience absorb the moment. Then, she shifted to the successful landing in St. Bart's, emphasizing how preparation and clear procedures had led to a smooth touchdown. Pilots exchanged looks. Some nodded, others jotted notes. Simone invited them to share similar experiences, times when assumptions or distractions had affected safety. A young first officer spoke up, admitting that on his first long-haul flight, he had missed an altitude clearance because he was focused on a minor checklist issue. The group discussed how a simple challenge and response could have caught the error sooner. Next, Simone guided them through a communication drill. She paired participants and gave them scenarios, one as captain, one as first officer. They practiced concise calls, clear readbacks, and confirmed mutual understanding. When one partner intentionally injected a small error, the other had to catch it before proceeding. The room filled with laughter and respectful teasing as mistakes surfaced, exactly the kind of safe environment Simone wanted. During a break, the CEO slipped into the back of the room. He watched quietly as pilots practiced, then clapped softly. When the session ended, Simone introduced him to the group. He praised her initiative and encouraged everyone to stay open to change. His presence reinforced the message. Leadership at the highest level valued the voices on the flight deck. After the workshop, Simone circulated among the attendees, answering questions and taking suggestions. One senior instructor recommended adding a short online module before flight assignments. A line technician suggested including ground crew perspectives so pilots and handlers could understand each other better. Simone made notes on her tablet, excited by the collaborative energy. That afternoon, Simone returned to the cockpit to prepare for the final leg of the day, a repositioning flight to pick up a weekend group charter. She checked weather forecasts, noting a small band of clouds over a mountain range on the route. She filed a plan that avoided turbulence by flying around the buildup. Her careful preparation reflected lessons from both the sky and the hangar. As she pushed back for taxi, she thought about how much had changed in just a few days. A simple mistake had sparked conversations that led to workshops, new policies, and deeper understanding across departments. She felt proud to serve not only as a pilot but as a catalyst for growth. The engines spooled and the Gulfstream rolled toward the runway. Simone set power for takeoff, feeling the thrust build beneath her feet. With a gentle pull on the yoke, the jet lifted into the sky, leaving asphalt behind. She retracted the landing gear and leveled off, the world unfolding below in a patchwork of fields and forests. In the quiet of the cockpit, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The sky had tested her skills. The ground had tested her patience. Both times, respect, earned through competence and kindness, had carried her forward. She checked her instruments, dialed in the next waypoint, and settled into the cruise. Ahead lay a weekend of charters, training sessions, and perhaps more stories to share. As the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange, Simone guided the jet toward its destination. She imagined the faces of new colleagues listening in her next workshop, the ground crews greeting her with learned courtesy. She thought of the young pilot she had encouraged in the Caribbean and how that conversation might echo in the future. In simple moments, handshakes, briefings, casual chats, she saw the seeds of change take root. And as the Gulfstream glided smoothly through the sky, Captain Simone Williams felt certain of one thing. Every flight was a chance not just to travel from point A to point B, but to leave behind a stronger, more united team ready for whatever the next journey might bring. 2. Simone steered the Gulfstream through clear skies as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows on the ground below. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that her day would soon end with another successful flight. Ahead lay the weekend charter. A group of business travelers headed to a coastal resort for a conference. She reviewed passenger names and preferences one last time. Vegetarian meals, quiet cabins, charging stations near certain seats, and made mental notes to ensure everyone would have a comfortable trip. Though this flight was routine compared to the high-stakes landing in St. Bart's, Simone believed that every journey deserved the same level of care. As the jet descended toward the small regional airport serving the next charter, Simone guided the plane gently through layers of soft, wispy clouds. She felt the turbulence fade as she broke into smooth air close to the runway. Below, the landscape shifted from farmland to suburban streets, and finally to coastal dunes and shimmering water. The passengers watched through oval windows, pointing out sights like a curious child seeing the world for the first time. Simone smiled, acknowledging their delight with a friendly wave. After a flawless landing, ground crew greeted the jet and helped passengers disembark. Simone remained in the cockpit to complete her post-flight checklist. She checked each instrument, confirmed fuel readings, and logged flight details in her digital record. Each entry included notes on weather patterns, system performance, and any observations that might help the next pilot or maintenance team. These notes were her way of giving back to the system that supported her, a network of engineers, technicians, and fellow pilots who all shared one goal: safe and efficient flight. Once the paperwork was done, Simone stepped down the cabin stairs and greeted the waiting travelers. She helped one older gentleman with his carry-on bag and gave a quick safety tip to a young woman heading for her first business trip. Their thanks warmed her heart, reminding her that a pilot's role went beyond handling controls. She represented the airline's promise of reliability, safety, and respect. Even small gestures, helping with luggage, offering clear information, reinforced that promise in the minds of those who trusted her. That evening, back at the company's headquarters, Simone joined a small celebration in the main lobby. The CEO, along with the flight operations team, had organized a casual gathering to thank her for her leadership and the positive changes she had inspired. As she entered, the lights dimmed and colleagues applauded. Banners displayed messages, like "Thank you, Captain Williams," and "Breaking Barriers Together." Simone felt a mix of pride and humility as she accepted a simple glass trophy engraved with the company logo and the words, "Excellence in Aviation." She stepped to the podium, adjusting her uniform jacket. In her speech, she spoke of teamwork, respect, and the power of small actions to spark big change. She told the audience about the morning at St. Bart's, not to embarrass anyone, but to show how quickly assumptions can arise, and how patience and professionalism can dissolve them. She described the workshops she had led, the new ground crew briefings, and the pilot mentor program she helped launch. Each initiative grew from that first moment of confusion, blossoming into programs that would shape the company culture for years to come. After her speech, Simone mingled with the crowd. Young pilots approached her, seeking advice on flight techniques and sharing their own stories. Line technicians thanked her for including them in cross-department dialogues, and HR staff praised the training modules she helped design. Even the ground attendants who had once mistaken her role came forward to shake her hand, expressing genuine gratitude for the understanding she had shown. In those conversations, Simone saw real progress, not just for herself, but for everyone who worked in the airport ecosystem. Late that night, Simone found herself alone in her office, looking out over the city lights. She reflected on how far she had come, from a curious child watching planes at a small airfield, to the first black female captain in her company's executive jet division. She thought of the challenges she still faced and the ones yet to come. But she also felt hope that her story would encourage others to challenge stereotypes and pursue their dreams. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and whispered to herself, "The sky is not the limit. It's only the beginning." Tomorrow she would be back in the cockpit, charting new routes and mentoring the next generation of pilots. She would continue advocating for respect and inclusion, not just in words but in daily actions, always greeting each crew member by name, always checking credentials, always listening. And as she prepared for sleep, she thought of the countless journeys yet to unfold, takeoffs at dawn, landings at dusk, and every moment in between when the world paused at her fingertips. In those moments, she would carry the lessons of that first misstep on the tarmac, ensuring that every passenger, every colleague, and every plane she touched experienced the same unwavering professionalism she embodied.